There were covens in Europe. That's what they're called. The congregation. Covens in Europe, in America, and in Australia, and they have one right here. That whole bunch. The parties with the singing and the flute and the chanting, those are esbats or Sabbaths or whatever
don't get
they're called.
excited, huh?
Read what they do, Guy. They use blood in their rituals, and the blood that has the most power is baby's blood.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Covendom. This is our 4th episode. My name is Levi Rowland. This is my co-host, Brian Cain. We are both initiates of the Alexandrian tradition, and this is a weekly webcast on the occult. And this week's topic is the Gods of Witchcraft. So I feel a little bit like a missionary. Like we're just going to be like, hi, do you have time to talk about our Lord and Savior, Black Phillip?
Use the wand, Willow, you idiot.
Okay, that's a lot. But yes, today's topic is going to be the Gods of Witchcraft. Might go a little broader than that, but there it is. And we do have our chat available to us, so if you want to ask questions across any of the platforms you're watching us on, we will get them, we will answer them, and we can't wait to interact.
It's weird, we got her 4 times.
And they're all here too.
No, it's one person every time she posts.
Well, it's all the different platforms. So we do broadcast across multiple platforms, but if you're watching us, we'll be able to get them no matter what you're using. And if you're watching us through YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to Hex Education. Right?
Make sure you get to see them all. But it is...
Yeah. They're all here.
Why are we hearing him? Is it, when you go on there, you're going to have to scroll back because it's...
Yeah, it's fine. You'll be able to easy, see.
Right.
It's not supposed to quadruple people. I don't know why it is.
Anyway.
So we're going to start with our tarot card pull of the day like we've done every time. We've had some good, we've had some bad. It's a journey. So today's deck is an adorable deck that I want to show the camera. It's called the Marshmallow Marseille. It's by a wonderful little company called Wandering Oracle. But they're all in French. They're very pastel. It's a very cool little deck. They do a lot of interesting ones. But we're going to give it a good mix. Brian's going to cut it.
And yes, there's wine in the goblets. And hello, everyone.
Yes, hello. Of course there's wine in the goblets. What would it be? Mountain Dew? No.
I wouldn't worry about it today. It might just make things more difficult.
It could not have been more perfect. The devil. It's literally what we chose, the devil. 15th trump. Means a lot of different things depending on what deck you're using. If you're using a lot of modern interpretations, people tend to read it as alcoholism, destruction of the body. I mean, that might happen, not going to lie. But if you read some of the older interpretations of the card, it was occult secrets, mysticism. I will say as a reader, I read this card differently depending on whether or not the person across from me is a magical practitioner or not.
Well, it's also Capricorn, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the devil card, from a witch's lens, would be the horned god of the witches.
Yes, it would.
So he showed up. It is as above, so below. The devil card is below, so it's not a negative card by any means. So I think it's also most appropriate today because of the subject of the card. Fits the subject matter of today.
Yes,
so
it does.
Let's do our show or tell.
Absolutely.
And then we will get on to today's topic.
You want to go first?
Well, no, do the show first, because I actually decided to do a tell today.
Oh, okay. I did bring a show today. Since we're talking about the gods, we've been very lucky as a coven to be able to travel to some pretty incredible places, and sometimes the places you think are going to be amazing aren't, and then the places you didn't even think you would love become just places that kind of capture your heart. And one of the ones that surprised me was Bath in England, the site of the famous Roman baths. And while we were there, I picked up this small bust of Sulis Minerva, who was a composite goddess worshipped at Bath in England of the Celtic healing goddess Sulis, who was a local water goddess and a healing goddess, with the Roman Minerva. And she became this massive cult. And it was so amazing when you walk into Bath, they had this massive sign for the tourists that said, "The goddess awaits," at the museum where the old baths are. And it was one of my favorite things I saw when we were in the UK. And I thought she would be very appropriate because I have a feeling we're going to talk about sort of like the mixing of different cultures and how gods came together and things like that.
Actually, not to jump on your thing here, but it's very interesting because I thought at first that you and I really were the ones who were most in love with Bath, England.
I do, I love it.
You in particular were just like the goddess.
She was so present. It's one of my favorite places.
I liked it so much that Christian and I definitely want to go back, and we even sort of joked about opening a store there because the energy was so great.
It was fantastic.
But Christian, if you remember right, Sulis Minerva was known as a healing goddess, right? Mm-hmm. And he was throwing coins in the water trying to curse someone, sort of jokingly. And I thought that was, Christian. It's a healing goddess. This is not the place for it. Well, come to find out in my research, actually, they found ancient curses in those waters.
Well,
So
heal with one hand, curse with the other.
Christian was picking up on something.
It's good to be diverse. You know what I mean?
Show and tell. So we decided to do show and tell just as a way to, plug you into our week or just to share something fun about ourselves. So because of today's topic, I decided we've been doing showing mostly. So I thought I would do a tell. And I was going to share with you something I've mentioned and my personal journey with it, and maybe it'll inspire some people out there to do something on their own. I sort of by accident started belly dancing, and I'm taking belly dancing classes at a local studio here in New Orleans. And the reason why I chose belly dancing, I had a friend who was interested in studying dancing, and I thought, well, I've always been fascinated with belly dancing. Every year at Hexfest during the ritual, Hillary does a beautiful belly dancing ritual in honor of the goddess Isis. So, and the reason why is because they actually believe, or a lot of people believe, that belly dancing originated in the temples of Isis, or in the temples of Egypt, but Isis in particular might have been one of the reasons why it spread throughout the Mediterranean. So I was very fascinated with that in a spiritual way to sort of plug myself into the worship of the goddess Isis in a... Hold on, Christian's trying to
because it's
adjust
somebody fucked with.
Okay. I'm going to need more wine, everyone. So anyway, everyone thank Christian for producing for us. Anyway, so I was going to say that, I really, what is impressing me about this isn't my motivation, but going there, the teacher in particular, she's very fascinating. I don't know what her spiritual beliefs are. She's got some witchy things about her sometimes, but I'm speculating. It's been pure business. But what's interesting to me, and it might be my Alexandrian training, my training as an initiate, is I'm revering her like a priestess.
Yeah.
I'm like, she's my teacher, and I'm like picking things up and, being very obedient and that sort of thing. She's really hard on me, and I haven't figured out whether it's because she sees potential or because I'm that awful. I don't know yet. But she calls me out all the time. It might be because I'm the only man. But what I was going to say about this is, since this is about the gods of witchcraft, I thought it would be a good idea to say, in our modern context, we are now in a place to where we can start to learn things and do things. We don't have to settle for what's just published in a book or what's been handed to us. We can learn ancient music. If you're into Celtic spirituality, you can learn to play the harp. You can learn to write poetry. In other cultures, you can learn to play the lyre. You can learn other languages. You can dance. There are so many things we can do to elevate this, not only within our own lives, but in the broader movement.
So you can take devotion to an actual physical place.
I'm learning a new art form that I'm doing for spiritual reasons that I actually believe. I wouldn't go into a circle and try to make everyone a belly dancer, but I might be able to use some of those techniques to create dances that would be good for everyone.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Art.
So on to today's topic, the gods of witchcraft. Levi, why don't you start with your little blurb about it?
So we talked a lot about doing this show because it's kind of one of my favorite topics. I will say, I think we have a set of core things that make us a tradition, that make us a practice. Some of them are spiritual beliefs. Some of them are practices. I know there's a big thing right now about whether or not witchcraft is more practice-oriented, more belief-oriented. I think it's both. But what struck me is everybody's craft does express itself in a unique way. And mine tends to be very, very God-focused, very deity-focused, my particular approach to craft. So I was looking forward to the show a lot and sort of thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And what I want to say as my little intro, and I won't be too long-winded here, surprise, surprise, is we both know that we see witchcraft as a religious practice, as a deity-centered practice. And I think a lot of modern people have a knee-jerk reaction. So what I really wanted to start with in this episode was something that isn't about which gods do I love, because we'll get into that, or which images of God or whatever. It's this. This is what I want to start with. Christianity is not a synonym for religion. And they do not own belief. They do not own faith. They don't own prayer. They don't own any of that. And I think a lot of people in the magical community are so sort of hurt or knee-jerk responsive to Christianity that any talk of the gods or prayer or worship or devotion freak them out because their mind immediately goes to Christianity. And my big thing is it shouldn't. People have been praying to the gods and loving them and worshiping them for millennia before that Galilean ever took a breath on this planet. So that's what I wanted to start with is don't think of this conversation as, oh, this makes me think of church. Well, then, honey, you went to the wrong church. We can own the gods as much as anybody else. We can be devoted. We can be believers. We can have faith without it being a calque or a replacement for Christianity. So that's where I wanted to start is we can love the gods. You're allowed to. You don't have to fight against some sort of childhood trauma. If you don't believe in them, that's a different conversation. But if the only reason that this conversation makes you uncomfortable is your childhood faith, that might be an issue.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
So for myself, the Gods of Witchcraft, and like Levi said, we will be getting into probably all kinds of little details. But I'd like to say, first of all, I do not consider witchcraft to just be a praxis.
Agreed.
For me, witchcraft is my religion, and we are initiated into a cult of witchcraft that approaches witchcraft as a religion, not a world religion in that sense. It is a mystery cult. We are freedom based. We are about the great work, which is the elevation of men and women into being their perfect being. It's the path of the initiate. However, on that path, we do in particularly work with a god and a goddess, which, regardless of what names you give to them, they are the primordial forces that we find in the earliest stories of mankind. And although some people might approach this as a sort of pseudo-history, it's really actually not. If you dig into what we know about tribal cultures, you will often find that in these tribes there usually was many gods, many goddesses, many spirits, but there usually was a mother and a father. There usually was a perfect couple somewhere in that story. And for us, we are going back to that energy where we have the first life-giving goddess, the first, mother of mothers, the mother of our mothers. And we're going back to that first male deity, which was the hunting god, who would be our first connection intimately to the forces of death and the need for survival, which would create the first warriors and the first, guardians as well, and that's the father of our fathers. So we're reaching back to these primordial forces, just like witches work with earth, air, fire, and water. These are primordial forces that are just as ancient, regardless of what names have been given to them as time goes on. And for me personally, those forces are the most potent and powerful parts of my magical work. And, they are both a who and they are both an it,
Agreed.
As a who, they are an anthropomorphic form, that we've given them, that we've imagined out of art, or that they've communicated with us through different cultures and ideas. As an it, they're consciousness. They are that primordial force that we are working with, we're tapping into. So that's what we're going to sort of be talking about today, and not just our own, what's your favorite name?
What's your favorite goddess? Which we can do that too.
Let's skew for questions really quick. If anyone has any questions, or you wish to be our first video caller, please let us know on text. I think Christian agreed he'd handle the first video caller for us.
Yes, if we have anybody who'd like to come on.
Just changed platforms. We started out on Crowdcast, and this, I think it's called Realstream or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter because you don't have to go to it. It's much more convenient. You don't have to go to it, and all the comments go into one place.
So we can interact a little easier.
When you comment, we are getting several of the same comment, but it's good for not missing it. So how do you scroll back to...
You just scroll up. Right now it's just a lot of greetings. Hey to some of our people who've come back. Thank you, Daisy. I agree. This is my favorite topic too. One of the things I forgot to mention in my little intro while questions are loading is it's also important to realize that there's a lot of interesting approaches to deity in witchcraft, and it's not really mutually exclusive. I have a thing I always tell people when they ask me about the gods or when deities come up, is I always say the following thing: There are many gods. There are only two gods. There is only one God. There is no God but yourself, and God is nothing, literally no thing. All of those statements are true with the right context.
You're missing one thing, though.
Which one?
I think you missed it. That God is also all things.
God is all things, yes. God is all
You
things.
said no things, but it's also all things.
God is no thing.
Yeah.
God, there are two gods. There are many gods.
Everything that is nothing is God, and everything that is everything
Yeah.
is God. And when we're saying God, we're talking about just all of us, the life force.
Yeah.
You know,
So those
everything.
statements are all true,
Yeah.
and they're not really contradictory.
And
even if
that's
they
the
sound they are.
consciousness. That's the force. That's
Mhm.
the it.
Yep.
You know, there is the who as well. You know, and that's where it becomes confusing. I think Levi and I both have two things in common. We approach, and please correct me, we approach witchcraft through the lens of a mystery tradition and not necessarily one culture. And we both very much believe the gods are real on some level, but we're Neoplatonic in our philosophy.
Yes.
Yes, right?
Yeah. I would definitely, my favorite philosophers are Proclus and Iamblichus, late stage Neoplatonism. On the Mysteries by Iamblichus is probably one of my favorite philosophical texts.
Western occultism is based on Neoplatonic thought. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. We're not here to teach you that.
Thomas Taylor did beautiful translations of them in the 19th century or early 20th. Forgive me. But they're fantastic. So, we use a lot of Neoplatonism. And that really is the birth of Hermetic Kabbalah, too, which we also bring in.
I'm going to ask you my first question.
Ask away. Oh, one person did want to know what kind of wine we're drinking. It's a cab, I think.
It is the Prisoners. It's a red blend.
Okay, red blend. Sorry.
It's fairly good. I first had
Good,
it.
dry, red wine.
It's fairly good. It's not top notch, but it's not bottom of the
And
barrel.
before you ask me this, because I know we want to make sure we get people's questions.
Yes, if there was any.
Somebody did mention that this is sort of the same explanation from the Orisha tradition. That would also be true of voodoo.
Absolutely correct.
They have a very similar approach.
And Catholicism as well, in a way.
Yeah,
you
the
know,
one true God. Yeah.
It really comes down to the birth of what we now call monotheism. The problem is monotheism got in the hands of organized religion, but it came out of this sort of higher end educated philosophy where you would have the temple priests and priestesses of the initiates of the mysteries who might be worshiping, Hera. Let's just use Hera for this
One of my
fun
favorites, actually.
And in that temple, they are educated that all goddesses are extensions of Hera, but the non-initiate rabbles don't understand that, nor are they ready to. They see all these different gods as being different. You have to understand education's come a long ways, right?
Yeah.
We can all discover, we all read and write and that sort of thing. So there was a time when that sort of higher end thinking really wasn't for the masses. It's not about control, it's just they weren't really ready for it, and there was no way of communicating it with them. It would have just been like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean the Earth's round?
I know, right? But
we still have people in the United States who think
who are
the Earth is
confused,
flat.
right, about a lot of things, like vaccines, like
Can I
the
just
Earth.
ask, does anyone here think the Earth is flat?
No, it's a hard no from the crowd. Thank God.
It's disturbing that exists.
I will add this. It's one of the things that irritates me a lot.
I think it was the Trumpies. I think the Trumpies.
God, I don't even. One of the things that irritates me a lot in conversations about this is, again, it goes back to that. I'm a lot of people who I've met I will say this: I've never met an initiate in my life of a true initiatory system who was a hard polytheist. Everybody I meet who is that is a neo-pagan, which no judgment, but I think a lot of them it's that knee-jerk. Monotheism's Christian. No, it's not. Plato was not a Christian. Aristotle was not a Christian, and they were monotheistic. The Neo-Pythagoreans were not Christians. They were monotheistic. Hinduism is deeply monotheistic in its later variations. All those gods are reflections of one true Brahman. The devas are not absolute. They are reflections of a deeper true reality, the monad, as we would call it in Neoplatonism, or Kether, or Ein Sof Hour in Kabbalah. This is an old concept, and it predates Christianity. Zoroastrianism is monotheistic, and it's way older. So they don't own it.
Well, it's
they don't.
Explaining this a little bit in a little bit of a layman's term. Kabbalah is a really good way of breaking down if you know anything about the Kabbalah. But it is not that we are only monotheists. It's just at the end of the day, that's part of it. We can exist on all those different planes. So we can work magic and exist in Monotheism. I'm saying that right?
Wait, which one?
Monotheism, am I saying that right?
Which one?
The bottom, the barrel, animals that...
Animism.
Animism, thank you.
Animism,
I thought I was getting that off. But animism. We can exist in animism. We can go into polytheism, to where at times, we're magically or consciously working with different gods and we're thinking of them so in such a focused way that they become separate. But when we work in our temple, we are often dual theists.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not sitting there thinking of ourselves as monotheists. We're working with the male and the female forces as separate things, right? It's in the philosophical that we are monotheists.
Yes.
We don't actually worship or do rituals as a monotheist. It's just that we understand that all things are one and
yeah. And I think it's also important to realize that it's not some sort of facile universalism either. Because it does also irritate me when people will say, I'm doing a love spell. Which god should I use? I hate that phrase. It's like, well, Aphrodite, if you want to go Greek with it. And then so I don't think, for example, do I think that all things are one? Yes, but I think it's very complicated, and I think it's a dynamic being that the one is, right? So do I think Erzuli Freda and Aphrodite are the exact same thing? No, right? I don't think our minds are going to get to that level, and I think randomly interchanging is not always the best way, because I think you would agree that when you call through or when you're devoted to a particular image of the goddess or the god, it's different.
Well,
Isis is different than, say...
Isis is a complicated one, especially if you're asking me.
Than like an Orisha, for example.
I don't work with them. So.
I know, but I'm saying the experience is different.
What I would say is if I was calling Aphrodite... let's say I'm working with Aphrodite to, help me in a romantic situation to get a new lover or whatever it is. Or, whatever the niche is, why I'm working with her. Or perhaps I just really love that goddess and, obviously we're all going to see her as a goddess of, rising from the foam of the sea. She's beauty, she's love, she's passion, she's all of those things that go along with it. I'm not then going to turn around and say, oh, by the way, Aphrodite, I need your help in battle. If I call on Morrigu and that person, because I'm getting into some sort of conflict, I'm not necessarily going to, in that sort of instance, be thinking of them as the same thing, because that's just the way the human mind works, and you're talking about using the gods in a magical correspondence. Now, if you were in the cult of Aphrodite, if you were an initiate, say, of, I think it was on, I'm probably getting this wrong, I think it was near Crete, there was a cult temple of Aphrodite Erodine, and this was a particular cult dedicated to this hybrid goddess, which you'd happen to have. If you were an initiate of that, or if you were a Spartan worshipping Ortheo Athena, you probably would think of those names as being some sort of supreme deity. When you worshipped Isis in ancient Egypt, she was the throne. She was the wife of Osiris. She was the mother of the pharaoh. Yeah. When you worshipped her later in Alexandria, Egypt, and in Rome, she was, literally by her initiates, considered to be a lot of other goddesses, if not all of other goddesses. So to those initiates, they would absolutely see Aphrodite as an extension of Isis, and it would be not weird at all. Mm-hmm. So it's about your level of thought and your relationship to divinity. If the divinity is simply a magical correspondence for you, then that's all it is. If you're working with Mars only because you're working magic associated with Mars, that's not really, being in full worship of Mars. That's not being in the cult of Mars, which would be, unless you're in the military. I don't know how that would work out anyway. But, it is what it is. So I think it's really about mental state. But witchcraft, right? Because we are a little straight here, so this is a great question for you. What is your criteria for a witchcraft god or goddess versus a god and goddess?
A god that would not be a god of the witches. So what's my criteria?
No, what would be your criteria for a god of the witches? Or goddess of the witches? For gods of witchcraft.
Both. Yeah.
What would be your criteria? Taking us outside the mysteries, where all gods are one god and all gods are one goddess, what would your criteria be for something that fit the bill?
They have to be associated in some way with magic. So that covers a lot. Isis, who steals the name of Ra, Hecate, especially in the Chaldean oracles and in stuff like that, covers a lot of gods and goddesses there. So they have to be associated with magic, some way to change the world, right? If it's a female goddess, I think it is pretty important that she be associated with a lunar aspect. Isis was a moon goddess in some ways. Same with Hecate, Selene, all of those. Artemis, Diana, the gods that we use, right? If it's a god, he should bear horns, right? And people think that only limits you to Kernunos. It does not.
Hardly.
Hardly at all. Amun has horns. The Apis bull has horns. Moses has horns. There's a lot of horned gods in the world. Dionysus has called Serapis. The two-horned, Serapis, yeah. Bacchus is literally called the two-horned god.
Sometimes Mercury was depicted.
Sometimes Mercury had horns, right? So I think the god needs to have horns. And here's one that I think is important. I would prefer, now this is not true in every single... Or
at least associated with horned animals.
Yes, or associated with a horned animal. This is not true in every mythology that we poke around with or use, but I would prefer it if the god died at some point, right? Gods of death and resurrection.
Well, that's pretty typical in the mystery cults.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So Attis and Osiris, I would prefer it if there was a sacrificial element before I would call a god of witchcraft, one that would work within our cult very well. But yeah, those are the big ones: fertility, magic, the moon, life and death, resurrection, the perfect couple, the sacred marriage.
Now, how do you scroll up so we're not missing anything?
Okay.
I see. There's a lot of...
this is where I was, so you're...
A new platform for us. Sorry, Mike.
Yes, and greetings to everybody saying hi in chat. We see you.
The problem is this is a new... Oh, there we go. Now I'm hearing...
And we do have a question. Why do you feel the god must have horns?
Well, I'll give that question to you, but I'm happy to follow up with it after you answer.
Well, we worship a horned god, and it goes back to what Brian said at the beginning of the show. The horns are a reference to the primordial nature of what we want to worship as witches, which is the hunter, life, death, resurrection, the first animals that we hunted, the horned game, right? And there's other reasons that we like the horns. I think that they're symbols of the crescent moon, so the goddess is within the god, and the god is within the goddess. There's a mystery there, right? As a matter of fact, I can't remember if it's Virgil or Cicero who calls the goddess in a devotional poem Regina Bicornis, the twice-horned goddess, because that is the crescent moon. So I think there's a divinity sort of parallel there that happens that I really like when the god has horns. But yeah, it's the hunted, the hunter. It takes us back to that more primordial place.
I have a strong preference for the god of witchcraft having horns, and it certainly is a criteria for me. But there are gods that I would give the model of god of witchcraft that we don't have any historical evidence of having horns. Apollo, Lucifer.
Yeah.
Sometimes sun gods because of their relationship to the moon. I do think this happens to a lesser degree in, Europe proper. I think that occurred more in, with the Greeks and the Romans.
Yeah.
Early on. Within the Celts, the Germanic cultures, and Egypt, usually there were horns present, and there was a lot of crossover there. So, interestingly enough, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'd say 95% of the gods that I work with that I would associate with witchcraft do have horns or are associated with a horned animal. And I hazard if you dug far enough, we don't know too much about Lucifer.
Yeah.
We could really go into that,
Love to, big
But
fan.
I do think there's an obscure hybrid Apollo that may have had horns, but he was a hybrid.
They did him with a lot of Egyptian gods in the Hellenistic Greek period, the Ptolemaic period. So probably.
So I think it's very typical. And the reason why is you'll also find it very typical that, like Levi said, I do agree that the goddess of the witches generally is associated with the moon the same way. I can think of one example, Brigid, or Breed, where we do not have historical evidence that she is associated with the moon. Other than that little piece, she completely fits the bill of goddess of witchcraft. That doesn't mean she wasn't associated with the moon. We just don't have proof, right? There's some loose evidence that she might have been. There's just so much we've lost. So I do, within our craft, we worshipped the moon goddess, and the horned one. The sun becomes sort of a secondary facet of the god, right?
I think so,
It's
yeah.
there, but it's secondary. Because originally witchcraft, the witchcraft that we're practicing is a lunar-based fertility cult. And I think horns are another form of the moon. I think the horned god actually originally is a moon god.
Mm-hmm.
I think becoming a sun god is a later addition because of agriculture. There's a belief that a lot of Paleolithic people used to hunt at night, especially big game. You've probably all seen the things about them tricking animals off cliffs and things like that. They believe this was done at night. I don't know, it's all speculation, really.
But it's interesting to think about. I mean, and it takes
a lot
it
of
back to
moon
the hunting.
goddesses originally had animal horns as well.
They did.
Yeah.
And they call in the Orphic hymns, I think it's either the Orphic hymns or the Homeric hymns, they refer to Artemis as horned, as bearer of the horns and all that.
I 100% agree with Levi that they have to be involved with magic. That's a really big one.
Yeah.
All gods have supernatural powers, but certain gods are actually associated in their own culture with the umbrella term witchcraft,
Yep.
with magic. For instance, in the Egyptian pantheon, regardless of whether you're going back to ancient Egypt or whether you're going to Alexandria, Isis was associated with magic.
Yep.
Her temple priests and priestesses were magicians. They were.
They did the amulets. They wrote the books. Yep.
Yeah, that's what she was always associated with. Before she was associated with the moon, actually, that we know of.
Yeah.
But she's only been a moon goddess for about 2,000 years.
Just that.
Yeah. So that we know of. So, we're going in all these things. So we've got, I think the sacred couple is another thing that you want to look at.
The sacred marriage.
The sacred couple is that the witchcraft goddesses, usually you'll find them together. Like you find Pan with Selena. That's in history. And Selena can be equated with Diana. You find Osiris with Isis. There's... Cernunnos is a bit tricky, but if you actually research it, a lot of what we know about that god is all through, discoveries, objects, inscriptions. We don't have any myths, but there are actually a few pieces that have been found, more than one, where the god that they would attribute to being Cernunnos, because we only have the only place where that specific name appears is on one altar in France. Whereas there's a couple other artifacts that appeared. One was written in Greek, and the other one, I can't remember now. But there's a few different ones. But they have found this antlered god in places, in more than one place, the artifacts sitting alongside a goddess, right?
Yeah.
So they know he was sacred paired with something. What you'll find fascinating is that a lot of them have thought this might have been Epona because it was around in her area, but several of them she's holding a pomegranate.
Which takes it back to the mysteries, right?
And the pomegranate does not fit into the cultures in which she was found.
They didn't grow them in
there. There's the same thing in the Gundestrup cauldron. You've got this goddess inside the cauldron next to the Cernunnos figure, who she's flanked with elephants and a 6-pointed star. It's not fitting in with the culture. Obviously, the goddess has always had a strong intake from the east.
Oh, definitely. Inanna, Ishtar.
And I think it's remembered. I think that, that merging of that. So these sacred couples are another thing you'll often find. And I realize some people have to create that for themselves. We're not born into tribes, obviously.
No.
If you're initiated into one of the traditions of witchcraft, you'll have a specific name for the god and the goddess given to you at initiation. If you're not, then, really it's the moon goddess and the horned god, witchcraft.
Yep.
You can call them whatever you like. You can call them Diana and Pan. You can call them whatever you like. As long as you're really internally reaching outwards and you're working with them on your inner plane, they will respond. I can guarantee you they will. Especially if you're working the arts. They will pay attention. And if you're seeking initiation or if you really want that relationship with them and you work with them with that being in mind, then they will really, really, really work for you.
And I think that, this whole concept of this divine couple is important to bring it back to that conversation of what we said in earlier episodes of Covendom, which is Brian and I really do see witchcraft as hearkening back to or carrying on in a spiritual sense, the mystery religions. And the mystery religions almost always had this in them, whether it's Pluto and Persephone or Hades and Persephone at Eleusis, Attis and Cybele or Magna Mater in the cult in Rome of the Great Mother. You just see it everywhere. The cult at Samothrace had this of the divine marriage. It is something that pops up a lot, and I think you also see it in the East, in the mysteries of Tantra, where you see the image of Shakti, and personified either as Durga or Kali or whatever, on the body of Shiva. And a lot of that is about the exchange of power and sort of how it's working and where it goes, and it's very similar to what we do. So I think you see this as a constant, and it's more in the mystery traditions or in the sort of dharmic tradition in the East or whatever. And so we do feel more drawn to that than sort of state cults where you have like, this is the god of war, and this is the god of that particular well, and this is the god of the sun. And, we're much more interested in the initiatory thing. Yeah, what the mysteries we're doing.
Someone has a question
yes.
there.
So the question that said is, do you approve of, or not approve of, but do you like the analogy, or would you agree with the analogy of the gods are basically light cast through a prism?
That is Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
That is like literally I believe, if I'm remembering, that's actually literally a description used in Neoplatonism.
Yeah, it's through a mirror, right?
Yes.
The one is cast through the many, through thought.
Yes, that's how it is. Yeah, I do.
We have another question from Mary. Where do you see us going, regarding the sacred couples with current non-specific genders?
Even non-specific genders have a mother and a father. Until science takes us to a place to where we are cloning children or something weird like that, which is probably not a good idea, nature has designed it to where men and women biologically have children, and right now that's the only way that you can create life. Everyone has a mother and father, so it doesn't really matter where you come from or what your sexual orientation is or what your identification is. You have a mother and a father. As human beings, we can relate to that. And you have an ancestry, you have a grandmother and you have a grandfather and you have aunts and you have uncles, and you've got these sacred pairs going all the way back. If, it's not offensive, it's nature, it's just reality.
And also, I think that what's even more interesting to me is, if you think that we are some sort of rigid heteronormative obsession, it's not. The whole concept of this is that divine masculine energy and divine feminine energy interact in very powerful and mysterious and amazing ways. So do I think necessarily that we have to have this, obsession with it, this is X and this is Y? No, not necessarily. I think that the gods are unique, and I think, whether it's East or West, you do see there's a fluidity to it that I think can be embraced.
Any conversation that we have about initiatory craft, we get questions about gender rules.
Yes, we
every
do.
time. And that's one of the biggest topics, hot topics, and hot topics are fine. We're quite accustomed to it. The reality situation is, in the end of the day, I'm gay, Levi's gay, right?
Oh my God, people are going to know now.
We're both down with the D, right?
That's rude. He doesn't know what I do in my private time.
Anyway, I kind of do.
How dare you? It's the shoes, isn't it?
I kind of do.
It's the shoes.
That and other things. Got spies everywhere. My monkeys see everything,
It's not okay. I'm not comfortable.
It takes a man and a woman to have heterosexual sex to have a baby. And right now, that is the only way that is possible. If you don't like it, write Mother Nature a letter. We are a nature religion.
She's kind of busy right now.
We are a fertility cult. So, we look at, we're not interested in trying to make babies. We're trying
Speak for yourself. I have some weird hobbies.
trying to create the fertility of spirit. Now, personally, Levi and I both see the god and the goddess as bisexual entities, which makes sense when you take them back to the one. You've got Binah and Hokmah.
Yeah.
I always want to say Chokmah. Hokmah. Binah and Hokmah, they go into Kether. It's all a relationship. This is not about sexuality. It's about the perfect couple.
Blessed be Carrie.
Is the two sides of nature, life and death, right? It's not just about sex. Sex is just one little thing in there. It's the sun and the moon. It's the sky and the earth. It's life and death.
It's the other
in
psychological
above,
terms.
It's below. It's, as Levi says, I suppose you can fall in love with yourself, but it's not as much fun.
It's not.
And it's not as dangerous either.
No, it's not witchcraft, right?
So that's my answer to that, is I think that witchcraft within our tradition, witchcraft within the initiatory traditions, is not heteronormative, it's nature-oriented, and we are completely okay with reality. We live in very sensitive times.
Okay with that. I hate reality.
Where everyone will drink more. Where everyone
Cure.
a lot of people, especially on social media and what have you, are very sensitive, and everyone's afraid to say the truth and they're going to offend somebody. But I'm not going to apologize because I had a mom and a dad, you know, and if you had two dads and you were adopted, great, fantastic. If I liked kids, I might do that. But they did not produce you. You know, they did not produce you. They might be your fathers because that's their title and because they're legally your fathers, but they didn't create you.
And through love.
Well, they didn't create them through love.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying.
This isn't a negative.
Yeah, I know.
You know, that's the over-apologetic thing. We can't say the truth without having to qualify it. Oh, we know they love each other. We're gay. Of course we know they love each other. If Christian and I wanted to have children, we would buy several of them.
Wow. No.
But we don't. So anyway, hopefully
We
that
would buy
answers the
them.
question. I would. I would buy one.
You don't have to buy them, Brian.
Madonna did.
She didn't buy. Well,
Yes,
maybe
she did.
she probably did.
She did.
You know
Buy
what?
one in every color.
I mean,
She did.
She probably did.
She didn't
So,
buy all of them. She did buy one.
We do
of
have
them.
some things in chat that I want to bring up. Shout out to people who are giving us all the greetings from Tennessee. Me too. And Carrie and Ronaldo, blessed be.
I thought there was another question.
There was. Somebody had a very interesting one that kind of just totally took me off guard, but I think is interesting. How does reincarnation or this concept of eternal life fit in with pro-life or pro-choice and sort of coming into this world? So birth, basically.
Very interesting question. I honestly don't have an opinion on it. What I would say is, I suppose if something's being reincarnated, it's been reincarnated into that baby, and the mother decided not to have the baby. There's an old legend, and I wish I could get the source from it on the top of my head. I can't. So if someone can source it for me, or maybe some writer made it up. But there's this idea that on the winter solstice, the goddess has to be placated to continue to turn the wheel. And I think it was an Irish legend, but I'm not really sure. But the idea was that, there will become a time when she will refuse to give birth to the god, and she will turn the cauldron of fire upon the earth and destroy it. The idea was that if she chose not to give birth to the son, it's the end. It is, the mother's choice. So if the mother chose not to be a portal for that reincarnation, I'm assuming that it will find another way in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So I would say my own opinion on that is complicated. I think there's a lot in spiritual traditions about, because the one thing that you have to talk about is, well, when is a child, if you believe in a soul, when is a child ensouled, right? When do you have a soul? According to the Catholic Church right now, the moment of conception, a fertilized zygote has a soul, according to Catholic dogma. According to Jewish tradition and the Talmud, I believe, and anybody who's watching, if I'm incorrect, please correct me, I believe it's when the child draws its first breath, right? So that's why it's not considered a heinous crime in traditional Judaism. If, like, for example, if a mother's life is in danger, I'm pretty sure the Talmud instructs that an abortion is not a sin, right? Because it's not an ensouled being anyway. But I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. It's just the last time I had this conversation with a person of faith who was a practicing Orthodox Jew. That was what I was told. But so I think there's a long tradition of really seeing it as whether or not that's an issue at all, even.
Well, here's what I'm going to go back to nature. Why does a mother cat sometimes eat one of her babies? Why does a mother owl sometimes peck one of her babies so that the other babies will eat it? This is nature.
Nature's not kind.
I give the right to be the portal of life to a woman. And
if
she chooses to close the gates for whatever reason she chooses, I give her that right. Life and death are part of nature.
Mm-hmm.
In witchcraft, I don't believe in any morals except intent. So there you go.
Yeah, and
if a mother is murdering babies because she wants to murder babies,
extremely pro-choice.
Horrible, then that's.
I'm extremely pro-choice. I think in the right circumstances, I think witches were.
But in witchcraft, the question is, and of course we don't have some sort of dialogue for this, but I think most witches would agree that the mother is the portal of life.
Yeah, I would too. And I don't think that it's
the god is the portal for fun. Yes, he is.
So you say.
It's true.
I think that's just the wine, Brian. The wine.
I don't know. Maybe he's never visited you.
You know what? You don't know who shows up at my house at night.
I know he's been to my house. I know he's been to Ellie's. don't think he's
Ellie has some good stories about meeting God in the woods. Like, it's very much a sort of like Philip, right?
Do we have any more questions?
Comments, love all the comments. People talking back and forth in the comments about it. But did you have one, or do you want me to ask you one?
You asked me one. I don't think you have yet. Have you?
Sure.
No.
Do you believe that private devotion, sort of to a particular deity, like in a traditional pantheon or whatever, whether it's Greek or Roman or Celtic or whatever, has a place in craft, or do you think that we as craft practitioners need to stick to that image of this is the god, this is the goddess, this is how they work together, these are their initiatory names?
Well, as an initiate, I can only speak for myself and my teachings. I would say that the overall, arching belief system is that, we do have a god and a goddess, and all other gods and goddesses fall under their umbrella. I think that we are all kind of trained and understand that the names we use are old, and really, if you researched them, you could find that they have really old roots in Proto-European language. However, there are other names that mean the same thing, and then we have secret names on top of that. So really, the overall arching thing is I think most initiates only go into polytheism when they're sort of, in a sense, either having a cultural identity, like they want to connect to their own personal cultures, and so they're exploring the god and the goddess through a lens of a different culture. So they might, and this is my opinion or my teachings, not universal. So if somebody's, for instance, part Native American, well, Native American seems very alien to witchcraft, but they might go into their tribe. If they're an initiate of witchcraft, that's their religion. So there you go. But they might go into their tribe and say, where is my perfect couple there?
Yeah.
Where's my earth, air, fire, and water there? And they might look through it for that lens personally for themselves, and they might come up with personal practices based on that. Or they might just explore their culture as a signed magical practice, But I think as initiates, we tend to mostly focus on those two providential powers.
Agreed.
Does that make sense?
Agreed.
Right.
And I find that the further I go on my own, that's what I want to work with anyway.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm drawn to the most.
It's overarching, Yeah. I might be drawn to other works, it's not really a big secret, some of the things that I do, but then again, I also have secrets and layers of secrets. So, it is what it is. As you traverse if you traverse initiation, you discover more and more about yourself, and you discover more and more about history, and you discover more and more about the traditions in which you're initiated into.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, like I said, the more that I go into it, that image of the divine couple, the horned god and the eternal goddess, those are things that I really am drawn to.
You should take this question, maybe?
No.
It's not a question?
No.
Oh, it's just somebody talking. All right, sorry. Looked interesting. If you want to be one of our first video callers, please message Christian. Are you on Facebook, or are you busy? Oh, he's doing. Well, let us know, and we'll see if we can.
They have to tell the chat or not.
Yes, if you want to be one of our first
and I'll send them a link.
video
gallery, everyone.
If you want to be one of our video callers, we haven't had one yet. Probably reserving it for guests if we ever choose to have them. But let us know here, and we'd be happy. If you do become a video caller, please give us each one question or a question for both of us.
I know I have so many problems with chat.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah. Love it. It's like a disembodied spirit that's with us. It's like the voice
the
of
mom.
God.
No, it's the mom from Snoopy.
Oh yeah, where you just hear it in the background, all the adults.
What's happening?
Wah, wah, wah.
Anyway, so I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
This will be a good one for you, Levi. You jest a lot about devil worship. What is the difference between your God and the devil of the Christians?
And the devil of the Christians. Oh God, do I really? Of course. In case you're wondering, the second season of Sabrina dropped last night at midnight, and I'm going to be binge watching it later, and I'm 2 episodes in right now. Don't spoil it in the comments or I'll kill you. So I might be a little extra devil-y, tonight. All joking aside, I think this is a tricky one for me, because I do actually feel a deep connection to that image, right? To the image of the god of the witches being known as the devil.
He's still a rebellious teenager.
Yeah, I'm not rebelling. I like the image. I do. I think the image of the seven is kind of nice. I don't worship Satan. I'm not a Satanist. I say Hail Satan as a joke sometimes, but I don't worship Satan. I don't believe in Satan. I don't believe in a fallen angel. I don't believe in any of that. However, I think that let's do a little role play here, not the kinky kind. It's the 14th century. You're starving to death. You're miserable. The church cannot help you, or it won't help you, depending. I'm not knocking the church, but in this situation, they couldn't help a lot of people.
They didn't have money. They didn't.
Exactly, right? And you hear that there's this thing in the woods that can illuminate your life, right? And your grandmother and some other people call it something else, maybe a fairy, maybe a spirit of the dead or whatever, an old god whose name has been forgotten. But the church calls it the devil, right? That's what they call it. But let's say that thing speaks to you and that it calls out to you and you fall in love with it. Then you're not going to care whether or not it's called the devil, right? So I don't care that it's called the devil. And on a more mundane note, do you know why I say all the devil stuff? I am so tired of, we're an earth-based religion. We don't believe in the... I'm so sick of this.
Nature.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so sick of this. Like, people come into Hex all the time.
Nature, she ain't always nice.
No, long of claw and red of tooth, or other way around. But I'm so sick. People come in and they're like, how do you become a witch? Or, do you guys worship Satan? And I used to give the classic answer of, we're a nature religion that believes in a goddess and blah, blah, blah. Now I just go, somebody's like, how do you become a witch? I literally just say, go into the woods and renounce Christ. Do I really believe that? No. Do I think you need to go trample across?
How do we get this to where he's not covering our comments? But
it's fun. That's why I do it. So, do I think there's a difference? It doesn't matter.
Our comments are being covered.
Yeah, he'll fix it in a second.
Yeah.
But we don't worship Satan, but the devil, sure.
Well, I do agree with that possibility, and I will say that the shuck and sighs are just wonderful. I'm going to have a meltdown later.
Fighting with
Yes, but you're being noisy and you're covering up our comments with what you're doing. Can you wait till later to do this, please? You're disrupting the show. So the devil.
Big fan.
If you look at, and we'll do a show on this, we should.
Yeah, we should do a whole show on the devil because it's a complicated, it's going to derail everything.
Yeah. People on this video, I had to type it.
Oh, do we have someone that wants to come on?
No, but if I...
Oh, well, don't worry about it until that happens.
I don't know why you're being bitchy.
The devil. Devil does not equal Satan. Somebody says, yeah, they're not. They're different concepts.
They're different words. The thing is that there's a medieval obvious image of the devil that doesn't come from the Bible. The devil that the church was associating with witches quite clearly doesn't originate in the Bible. The Bible says the devil's a seraphim. The Bible gives descriptions of what the devil may look like, and none of it includes any of the imagery or iconography that we've been raised in the West to picture the devil. That little red man with horns and a tail and a pitchfork associated with the devil, that's not in the Bible.
No.
But it does go back to the woodcuts. It does go back to the witch trials and this whole description. Something doesn't add up there. So it's one of the reasons why I look at the Margaret Murray hypothesis and I say she was flawed, but she had some theories that were really good, I think. And one of the theories was that there's some stuff coming up in the witch trials that do not come from the Bible, and they're consistently being brought up throughout Europe, and it's this common idea. And it also comes up in art, and that's one thing that people really forget, is that a lot of our history comes up in art, and so, we're coming up with this sort of vision of the devil, right? And this vision of the devil is something that does look like certain pagan gods. You've got Pan, right? Horns, cloven hooves. You've got Serapis, who had horns and a pitchfork and was associated with the underworld. You've got all these different gods. Hades associated with, which would become a word for hell. We've got all of these different words. So her hypothesis that the god of the witches may have had pagan roots is very plausible. And you find it in churches with the architecture that they have the little carved out images of the devil. They've got the north door blocked out. They've got all these different images. They've got green mans with horns. It's a persistent image that comes up, and it's not the devil of the Bible. It's not Satan.
No.
You know, so there may have been a period in history where people were like, my great-grandmother used to worship that thing, I was told. They're saying it's the devil, so maybe I am too. We don't know. That's the whole thing, is we don't know. It starts to become superstition, and it starts to become folklore, and it starts to become mythology. So we really don't know. But there is something to that, I think.
I think so.
However, and I always come back to this with you, is do I want to live there? Do I want to go to a 14th century, 1400s Sabbath with, I can imagine what it would smell like. A bunch of people that didn't bathe, frolicking around the woods, having, sex with lard. Now,
sounds very much like Coachella.
I much prefer the clean,
or something similar,
polished temples of Astarte with nicely oiled bodies and perfumes, and goldily adorned. And I'd like to move my witchcraft more to a glorification of what we could be and what we have been, than sticking in that place. But I certainly do love the spirit of it.
Yeah.
And I do get what you're saying, and I get why people are so attracted to it.
Yeah.
But,
it's also that concept of sort of rebellion in a way too. I think the true initiator is always the adversary in a way. So it is, when you're entering an initiatory mystery cult, you are going against the grain, whether it's Christianity now or it was the state cult a long time ago. So I think that image of the devil as rebellious, it's more about that than it is meeting in the woods and being dirty, right? It's that concept of this is the true knowledge, and it is hidden, it is secret, you have to work for it, and it might scare you a little bit. It will be scary. God is a little scary, right?
And it's appropriate in the West because of the simple fact that most of us were raised Christian, weren't we? I was raised Christian-esque, So that feeling of rebelling against this sort of oppressive regime is something we can relate to. We can relate to that. So I think that I do understand why people are drawn to it and why this sort of traditional craft things coming up with the devil's their god. It's not that we don't understand as initiates. We absolutely do understand and we can relate. It's just that we, myself in particular, I can see that and I can be drawn to it. And I could go into the dark of the woods and find that sort of mysterious figure. But I also want to reclaim for humanity, I suppose, the treasures that were lost, buried, destroyed, And that's why I'm saying let's elevate ourselves.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Better statues, better books, better art, better rituals.
We don't want to stay in this concept of I'm scared in the woods with my scary God. Like, we want to expand our consciousness, be larger. We don't want
our rituals 100 years from now to be based on Llewellyn books.
No, we want something we want to be able to push.
We don't want our dancing based on no skill. We don't want our music based on no skill. I think it was Christian that said, Laurie Cabot, I might be rephrasing that wrong, once said that the church has better music than us.
They do.
Because they do.
Palestrina, it's gorgeous.
We're getting better, though. We've got musicians.
We are getting. I do think that you're seeing a growth in that, but I do think beauty is that we do. The Greeks believed beauty was a path to God, and I want to bring that back too.
This is how occultists look.
On a good day, you haven't seen me.
I've never seen him in a tie-dye. He did have this horrible thing for camouflage.
I did not, and it was black.
It was disgusting. But he's dressing very nicely posh these days.
He's not British.
Doesn't have the money I have.
We've had to have this talk.
He's not British either.
No, he's not.
So I think that elevating yourselves, or elevating the community, elevating our work is a highlight. And I think when it comes to this subject, the gods of witchcraft, I think you should really contemplate what that means. It's what does it mean? It's not just going through a correspondence. I think that's what happens in a lot of modern paganism.
I think so.
I've got a correspondence. I've got a list of all the Welsh gods. I've got a list of all the Celtic gods. I've got a list of all the
But there's no connection
Roman gods.
to it.
Yeah, it's a
word.
knowledge of they existed. But
Just
are
a
you
word.
existing with them? And that's one of the reasons I told the story of the belly dancing tonight. As many of you know, I work with the goddess Isis. I'm existing with her in my real life. You know, that's part of the reason I'm learning the art of dance, you know, that's associated with those things. I don't know.
No, I agree with that. And I think that, you know, your own devotion to deity in practice is going to be unique and personal, and I know that's very cheap to say, but it's true. And I think when you approach the gods in that deeper way, you are not going to see them simply as, you know, I don't see, Aphrodite is not, for example, since we've talked about her, if you look at the literature and the history, she is not just a synonym for lust or love. There's entire mythologies around her, deep concepts. I mean, she takes a lot from Astarte and from the Phoenicians. In Rome, she's Venus Genetrix, the mother of Rome. You know, they worshipped her as the great mother. She wasn't just, you know, so I think
if you were a priestess of Aphrodite, she wasn't a correspondent. So if you were a priestess of Aphrodite,
she was something much more important. She was a view of divinity. She was a view of the other. You know, that thing, that numinous thing.
The common rabble probably went to her and said,
I need a boyfriend. Back. Yeah, bring my husband back.
But, you know, people saw her as a much deeper thing. She rose from the sea.
She rose from the sea. She was, and I do think a lot of, if you read, for example, Personal Greek Religion, a great book about Greek and Roman religion, or Burkitt's Greek religion, she was really Astarte in many ways. She took a lot from that Ishtar and Nana Astarte thing. I mean, Aphrodite and Adonis is Ishtar and Dumuzi.
I'm very prejudiced, but because of my research lately, it's the cult of Isis that really tied all that together.
Of course.
Because Isis and Ishtar, I do believe, had a strong influence on Astarte. And then the Greeks took that, and Astarte, the cult of Astarte was a big success.
And who was older is very difficult to...
In fact, it's very interesting, because just a little blur of this little piece will be in my book. In Britain, Astarte, they have found altars to Astarte. They've never found an altar to Venus or Aphrodite. They have to Astarte.
But they would have thought of them as...
Doesn't mean they weren't there.
Yeah, of
but
course.
Historically speaking, that's all we know, is that she was actually all the way over Britain. Isis was in Britain, Astarte was in Britain, but we don't have, even though the Romans were there, we don't have an example of Venus or Aphrodite in Britain.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Venus Genetrix, the Romans took her. I mean, that's the mother of Rome. Right?
I mean, we know clearly.
They loved her. You know, she was Aeneas's mother and all that.
She was there, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. She was their
mother. We don't have any
right?
historical evidence. So.
But, you know, correspondence, I love how you keep going back to that. That's my favorite thing, is stop seeing them as a correspondence. If that's all the gods are to you,
it's okay if you're using it that way.
Sure, but it's not the deeper
it's not
the deeper thing.
You cannot, if you're trying to be a polytheist, I can't talk to it, you really need to stick to one culture. So, and this is why I say I'm not a pagan. So if you want to be pagan, use that word. If you want to be a Celtic Reconstructionist, or you want to be a Germanic Reconstructionist, or you want to be an Egyptian Reconstructionist, that's grand. Find your time period and work with those gods. Those systems do exist. They exist within the zodiac. They exist within astrology. There are systems for that we use magically as correspondences.
Yeah.
But as initiates, we look at the gods primarily as the sacred couple. You know, as we said, philosophically, we go way beyond that, and we do play magically and otherwise. You know, I work with lots of gods that I don't necessarily feel like I'm like a priest solely of theirs.
Sure.
You know, I'm not a priest of Mars. But I work with Mars, both the planet and the god at times, within rituals and spells. But I'm not a priest of Mars. I don't go into a temple of Mars. I'm not spending all my time studying him. It's just not my thing. You know, there are going to be very few. How many gods can you serve? You know, and so that's the idea there. And if you grew up in a polytheistic society, you were generally initiated into some sort of cult.
Or your household gods, even.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's grand too.
Yeah, your family gods, the gods that were yours.
We're not knocking polytheism. We're just saying, you know, if you're going to take that route, I would magically suggest you pick a culture to work with. Explore, don't do it right away, you know, because you might change your mind. And it's fine if you change your mind. You know, I think this is the difference. We were talking the other night about the word spirituality. Spirituality is plain.
It can be, I agree.
Religion is commitment.
Yeah, and order.
So be spiritual until you want to be religious.
That works for me. I mean, like, I agree. We can do a whole show
and you
on
don't
my
have
thought
to be
about the whole
religious.
spiritual,
You don't
not
have to
religious
do
thing.
anything.
But I would go further and say...
Do you think a witch can be an atheist?
No, personally I don't. That's a personal opinion of mine. I think witch is an inherently religious concept. right? I think if you can practice magic and be an atheist, sure. I mean, there's lots of those, but I think witch exists in a religious context historically. It just does. But I would go further and say why. Well, then why? Because a lot of people say.
What about those people who think that Gardnerian Alexandrian witchcraft is more about the praxis? You don't not what you believe, but the ritual itself. There are lots of initiates, especially American Gardnerians mostly.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Who believe that going through the motions of the ritual are more important than what you believe.
Orthopraxy.
So you don't necessarily have to believe that. And I also know initiates, both Gardnerian and Alexandrian, who are not necessarily committed to the idea that the gods are anything more than energies.
Than archetype, right?
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think they're wrong.
Explain.
Right? I do. I think they're wrong. I think I have no time for Jungian witchcraft, and I know a lot of initiates personally who love that. It does not work for me. That's not a judgment. I mean, Vivian Crowley wrote a whole book about it. I'm not mad at it. I'm not saying it's an inappropriate thing. It does not work for me. I think that this idea that God is just an archetype or whatever. No, I think I'm much too Neoplatonist. God to me is ipsum esse, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, being itself. Right? It is isness in the universe. It is the necessary field from which all things spring, right? So without that, what are you doing? You're just play acting. If there is no God, and the gods aren't real, and there's no divinity, and there's no purpose to any of this, why the hell am I in a robe on a frickin' Tuesday giving up hours of my life to burn incense and kneel? I got shit to do. It's like this is theurgy, people.
These things must be done delicately.
The ritual nudity cannot just be for shits and giggles, right? But no, I think that it has to be, to me, there has to be that power. And I won't go too far on this, but it goes back to what I've said in previous shows. It's about the mysteries. You have to be able to see yourself in something other, right? You have to. It's what transforms the ego.
I was actually sitting there thinking as Levi was talking, which I was going to say.
Instead of listening, because I'm boring.
No, actually, you're not boring today. I think you're not boring today. It's a good subject for you. I think, obviously, Levi's highly intelligent, almost as intelligent as I am. I'm not as book-learned as he is. Though if you put us both in the woods, pretty sure I'd be the one to make it out alive.
Are you kidding? Have you seen him?
Yes, I would eat your dead body.
I am from Appalachia. You don't think I can live in the woods?
Oh, Jesus, I forgot about that.
Exactly. He forgot where I'm from, honey.
So anyway, I'd manipulate him to get.
Don't let this black paisley and these heels fool you, okay? Shit.
I'd manipulate you to save me. But anyway,
valid.
I forgot where you're from. He's just so gay, you can't really tell that he's a hick. But what I was going to say was that the gods, I've met many initiates who've said, or they've questioned, are the gods real, are they not real, or how they feel about this, or how they feel about that. And having an open mind, I often say, well, some people perceive them as energies. Some people perceive them as this. Some people perceive them that. They're literal. They're not literal. But I have to be honest with myself and say that I'm kind of like Levi. It's not that I think they're, sitting up on a cloud watching us, but I think that there literally is sort of a consciousness there on in some sort of occult field. Whether you want to call that the astral plane and collective consciousness, or whether you want to call it the power you're feeding into it or whatever. There are real spirits behind our god and goddess. Maybe not all gods, but our god and goddess. There was a man who was a student of Israeli regarding, and he was talking about the god Pan. And he was talking about all the different kinds of gods you have. You've got gods that represent ideas. You've got gods that are philosophical. You've got gods that represent the stone. You've got gods that represent the wind. These things are sometimes ideas, evolutions, concepts. They come and they go. There have been a lot of gods. There's been millions of gods. And I'm sure millions isn't actually I'm sure that's probably true. However, there are certain gods.
Dungeons and Dragons alone.
There are certain gods that are different. And Pan is one of those gods. When you look at Pan, he looks back at you. And that's witchcraft. Our gods, when you really find them, whatever names they've hidden in, because they're in every culture that we can find, really. Tribal stuff gets a little bit more obscure because we don't have the knowledge. But would you find the gods of witchcraft within any culture? they're different than the other gods because they are connected to nature and they're connected to the gift that the gods gave humanity, magic, which basically translates to figure it out for yourself. We've given you the ability to do so. And I think proof is in the pudding. We've gone to the moon. We've created weapons that can destroy the whole planet. We literally are in control of our own existence. Sorry. So God, gods, goddess, they've given us the gifts that we need. Yeah. And magic was one of those gifts.
Here's what I'll say. But first, a quick technical thing. If you do want to be a video caller, just what that means is we do have to do some different things here, and it will cover up comments for a second, just so you know too. So if we get a video call in,
for them,
it'll cover it for us. So it means we might not see your question. Yeah, thank you, Christian. We might not see your question, but we can scroll back and we'll get it if it gets covered. Yeah, we will be able to see it eventually. But to go back to the topic though, what I will say is, I think it's important to realize that when we're talking about the god and goddess as the creative and destructive aspects of the universe in this very Kabbalistic, hermetic way, right? That's really big. When you're having this concept of there is being in the universe, and then there is that being realizes that it could not be, Chokhmah and Bina in the Kabbalistic tree, these really high-end concepts. That's important to investigate, but it's very hard to live there, right? Eventually, you need to see that in some real way, and the god and the goddess of witchcraft give you that. You can see this. The god dies, he is reborn. The goddess is eternal. She is the moon, the reflected sun. You learn a lot from that way. It's a teaching tool. And I think that's why we have personal devotion to the gods, because we can't live in that constant, unending, high-end philosophical space. We go crazy.
This is going to sound very bizarre.
Shocker.
Do you know the scene in... I'm going to say it wrong. There was Interview with the Vampire, and then there's the movie. It was Lestat. Was that the name of the movie?
Yeah, Lestat was the sequel.
Queen of the Damned.
Yeah. No, we're going way down the line of Anne Rice here.
Yes. Well, there's only 2 movies. I'm talking about the movie. Yeah. So that scene where he goes before the statue of the old vampire queen and the king and the statues, and sensing something there, and it's this perfect couple, but he's being called to it. That's a sci-fi metaphor, but if you've seen the movie, that is a bit, I think, how our god and goddess is. They are this force. They're old, and I think that occultists and witches started working with them, and it woke them up. And if you want to be a student of the occult, if you want to be a student of occult history, you want to be a student of magic, I will tell you this right now. Research this. These forces got woke up. There were people praying to these gods and these goddesses, this particular 2. And you'd get this in the occult orders as well. Isis, for instance, was the goddess of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They didn't officially have a goddess, but she literally was. And in the OTO, that was switched to Nuit, her mother, right? So there were these certain ideas going on, and those orders both have sacred couples as well within their rituals.
The Hyros Gamos.
So it's already there. So these pillars, as Dorian Valiente put it, 2 are the mystical pillars that stand at the gate of the shrine, and 2 are the powers of nature, the forms and the forces divine. The dark and the light in succession, the opposite each unto each, shone forth as a god and a goddess of this, did our ancestors teach. When those portals, the eldest of gods, got erected, the portal opened, and you can all think your polytheism and all your pagan reconstruction and all the movements that came, because those gods, the mother and father of all gods and all cosmic forces, brought them back in.
I do think that they had a huge,
I think
role
it's
in that.
a story of humanity. I don't think it belongs to any one thing. I think it's a story of humanity. Nature teaches us everything we need to know. I'm an initiate, a huge proponent of the Book of Shadows, but nature is its own Book of Shadows. And it teaches us things for a reason. Like, why why, either there's no reason.
Yeah,
and
also an option.
And we're all
pure
just,
unadulterated nihilism.
Yeah, we're all just making reasons up for why we're here. Or there are things. I personally believe the patterns we're seeing are lessons for us. I think we sleep at night and wake up the next day to teach us about death and reincarnation. That's what I think. It's my own delusion maybe, but that's what I think. Like, why do I fall asleep every night? Why do I sometimes remember things and sometimes I forget, but I always wake up? It's to prepare me for the bigger journey that I'm on.
We sleep for chance to
Why is there a male and female? Because somehow, in most cases, but even when not, there's some sort of connection. It's to teach us that you need something else. You need something else to make things happen.
The other.
You cannot make things happen purely on your own. That's what I think.
I love what he just said, because this is a real big thing about craft. People who are into the occult in general, this is where I think we get a little separated, okay, in craft, which is this. We do need the other. And people hate that word, but you do. It's just like I've said before, it's like falling in love. You're not going to be able to really do it on your own. So what the god and the goddess teach you in craft is there has got to be some point, if you really want to be a mystic, if you really want to know what's behind the veil, if you really want to know what the world is.
Can we come up with another word than mystic?
It's just the useful one. I know why it's problematic.
Think about it.
I know.
Well, I don't have an idea. I'm just saying come up with a better one.
I know. But if you're
the language teacher.
An initiate, somebody who cares about these things. I mean, it literally comes from the Greek word mustis, which means initiate.
I'm not saying it's wrong.
Do you see him in the box?
No. There's green letters.
We're practicing.
Do we have a call in?
I worked with Sandra. I don't know. I tested it with 2 other people.
Are we calling someone in?
We're trying, but it's just the new platform we're learning about how to do video callers.
2 other people I tested.
There's a mosquito touching me.
We are in Louisiana, so they happen.
I was just saying I would live in the
love how you
woods.
totally killed. I know, and he's like, a mosquito, we're all gonna die, but I would kill you in the woods. Yeah, I'm real worried.
I was thinking about ruthlessness, not actually being in the woods.
Yeah, but you have to actually be in the woods in the analogy.
But now that I remembered you're a mountain man, I probably
He's a little
would
bit
be
more
like,
worried.
you wouldn't leave me. He'd say he would here, but he wants to know all the information I have, so he wouldn't.
He's not wrong there. Okay, he's got some things I need before I can let him die. You know what I mean?
Maxine, I think she might poison us all someday. Oh no, not till she gets all the information.
All the information, right?
No.
Mystic, though. I'm not allowed to use the word. Oh, but if you want to, back to what I was saying. If you want to be that thing, that initiate, you want to see ISIS unveiled, right? Then at some point, you are going to have to kneel down and look up into something that is not you. That is completely foreign,
It's
other,
the mirror of you.
horrifying, and then realize that it is you. And you cannot do that alone.
You can't realize, you can't tell. Here's the problem.
You can't start there,
You
though.
can't tell someone you're God.
No.
I mean, I know we do it. You can't tell someone that.
It doesn't mean anything.
It means nothing. You have to experience it, and then you will only do it for very brief moments, and those moments will be terrifying. What I can tell you is what it means is you're responsible for your own shit.
Yeah.
So one of the big problematic
Adulthood
things
sucks.
about witchcraft is we think you are your own judge, jury, and executioner. We believe, some people call it karma. We don't technically use that word because it's an Eastern word, but it is a true spiritual philosophy. You own your own stuff. If you pee in the pool you're swimming in pee.
Took it to a low analogy, but I'm not mad at it.
If you're angry in a room of people
true.
you're in the anger as much as they are. And we're all going to reap consequences of the energy we put in. You cannot project energy. A great priestess once said, every spell you do, every action you do is you. It's your record. It's your written record of who you are. That's the thing. So when you hear witches saying you shouldn't curse, you shouldn't do harm, you shouldn't do these things, it's not a moralistic approach. It's not an ethical approach either, because I think ethics are intent. But it is a living record of your soul. So in the end of the day, what do you want to be? Every action you do, it's not about honesty.
What do I want to be?
Not about ethics. It's
Wealthy,
what have you
independent.
actually done? if you've betrayed people, if you've used people, if you've abused people, if you've lashed out at people, or whatever your thing is that's negative, that's on your tapestry. No gaunt or goddess, Jesus or Satan, heaven or hell, or karmic law is going to change the fact it's a written record of who you've chosen to become.
You're responsible for your own life.
I am who I am.
That's what God says.
And that's what you need to say to yourself too. We're talking about being
what
God.
Brian is, what I agree with and what you're saying though is the modern occult world wants to start at the end. These people who just go up and they're like, I bought these things, I read this book, I'm God, I'm a God. It's like, you're not though. It's like, you are, but you're not. You can't start there. It's the same people, if you went to the East and you wanted to practice Zen meditation and you walked up to the master and said, oh, I achieved Satori, I've got Nirvana, that's great, that's the goal, right? Started there. They would laugh you out of the room or hit you with a stick. You don't start there. So that's why you just don't,
And no one who's really a master at anything will have to tell you they are.
Exactly.
They won't.
Margaret Thatcher has a quote I love. Don't love her before anybody thinks they can read about politics into that.
He's a huge royalist.
What? First of all, I think she was
I
too.
know
She was a
private
Tory. I don't think that was a
politics.
problem.
I know his private politics.
He thinks he does. I know his. But no, Margaret Thatcher, even though, again, not a fan at all before anybody writes in. But a broken clock is right twice a day, right? She does have that great quote where she says...
most Jews royalists? Because of King David.
Okay, A, I'm not a royalist. B, not Jewish. None of this is correct.
I thought you built my pyramids.
The Hebrews didn't build the pyramids either. That's the whole Exodus. We're going to talk about this later. I can't.
He's saying Charles Heston was wrong.
He was. Charles Heston was wrong about a lot of things, right, including the NRA. But no, all joking aside, what is it she said that one time? Being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Again, broken clock, right twice a day, not a fan of her. But good quote. If you have to
I didn't know that was her quote.
I'm pretty sure it's her. Pretty sure it's her.
I'm sure it's not just a meme I posted because I've seen that before.
No, I'm almost positive it's Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
She said a lot of weird stuff, though.
So, do we have a call-in, Christian?
Oh, no, he let me know. The issue was the person...
He'll try to do it on a laptop. You should tell people not to do it on their phone.
Yeah, if you can, please don't do it on your phone.
Right, gotcha.
If you do want to do a video call-in, that was the issue we were having earlier when we were talking about technical stuff. Try not to do it on your phone if you can. I know that's how most people engage with media, but if you got a laptop, that'll be your best bet.
All right, well, I'm going to see if I have a good question for you.
Ask away.
That was good, but it's not good anymore. Oh, here's one for you. Did you get into witchcraft for magic or divinity?
For me, divinity. I love the magic. I'm not mad at it. It's done a lot of wonderful things in my life. But like I said earlier in the show, everybody's craft expresses itself in unique ways, and I'm a particularly religious witch. So even my work tends to be pretty theocentric, kind of God-focused. The divinities call to me first. I will never forget certain moments in my initiation that I won't talk about here, obviously, but the ones that touched me the deepest and sort of meant the most to me were more divinity-focused.
I always add my own qualifier. I'm like, I'm going to ask you a question and tell you what I think. Interesting enough, I actually started in the craft not with divinity. Mm-hmm. It started out for magic, and I think I was drawn to the rebellious side of witchcraft.
Yeah, for sure.
But when I was 15 years old, I read Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, and that may not seem like much to you all now, but back in the dinosaur ages, it was one of the few books that we had. And it was the first time that I was not only introduced to the idea of witchcraft being a religion and there being a magical religion, but it was the first time I was introduced in my brain at that time to goddess religion.
Yeah. And
it was a huge, instant, orgasmic epiphany.
Okay, weird.
That follows me today. It was, because it fits along with so many things that was going on with my life at that time that all of a sudden I had a relationship with God that was always based on the masculine. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden someone had introduced me, I was 15, going through puberty, discovering I'm gay, all these things. All of a sudden I was being, I lived in a non-functioning religious household, meaning we were Christian, but lazy Christians. Like, we didn't actually like go to church or anything, and there was no Christian education. It was just like, this is the thing, right? And I had gone to church a few times, but I was, very much, interested in this sort of counterculture at the same time and discovering my sexuality. And then all of a sudden, here was this man talking about witchcraft. And I loved everything in the book because I was 15. I'm like, this is cool. I'm getting a thamey. I'm going to do this. Except I said Atham at the time, obviously. But, all these things.
Sam Hain.
Tried to do
mispronounced. Yeah.
Tried to do rituals. I was really into it, and I was just being a witch, And then all of a sudden, here's the goddess.
Yeah.
And I was like, the epiphany that went off in my mind, which doesn't seem like a big thing to us now or me now, but at the time I vividly remember that moment. It's probably one of the key moments in my life because it was the moment when I realized a lot of things at once. I realized that there were people all over the world who I'm hearing myself.
Oh, but we do got video. It worked.
It worked, but I'm hearing myself.
Oh, there we go.
All right, let me finish my statement.
Yes.
And then
Ooh, I can hear myself.
we're channeling aliens. It was the moment that I realized that there was a bigger picture to religion than being Christian or Jewish or whatever. I realized that there were countless civilizations who actually believed God was a woman.
Yeah,
Or
it's like
gods
I
were
met
women.
God. Spoiler
And
alert.
that was
it's
a
a
big
woman.
thing for me. It was a huge, eye-opening moment for me.
Agreed.
And
Same.
that is what started my quest for religion, for witchcraft being a religion. It wasn't Scott Cunningham or anything. I didn't learn about Scott Cunningham too much later. Oh, we lost him now. All right, we've got a video caller, our first video caller.
Yes.
I'm not going to try to say his last name, but his first name is Brian. And
Two Brians. Hey.
let's bring him on and see what happens, because I don't know how this is going. This is our first one, everyone, so we don't know how it's going to
We're
work.
doing a first video caller, split screen. Got the fancy smoke in the background. I'm here for the aesthetics.
Well, he's here for the aesthetics too.
Hey, Brian. Hey, Brian number
Hi,
2.
guys.
You have to be Brian number 2 because if I don't let him be Brian number 1, things get weird.
Why don't we just call him Brian?
My friends call me B, so I mean, it's completely up to you guys.
Brian's fine. I think that when I'm saying Brian, yeah,
We'll be fine.
You can call me something else. I don't know.
Okay, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So what was your question?
Or questions?
So it's kind of going back to the conversation with the devil. Brian knows I'm very fond of that whole,
Type.
idea. So I once heard or actually read the idea that the devil in some cases could be maybe a spirit of place, like a primal force and energy. I've also read that, like he's like something that has been here since the beginning of time. And I wonder what your take on that would be. Like, I don't want to necessarily say like, who is the devil to you? Because that's like, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that's a frequently asked question for me. So I'm trying to like word it in a different way.
Power of place. Well, I'll start. Is that fine?
Sure.
Or even a spirit of place.
Yeah,
You know?
Well,
Spirit of
let's
place.
think about that for a moment. So if you're going to go into certain regions, you're going to have a history to those regions.
Mhm.
So it might be gods, goddesses, folk spirits, their idea of this or that or whatever. Power of place is actually something very important to me, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a strong part of my teaching, but my coven and I have traveled around the world to various locations, so it certainly has been discussed. You know, when you're in Athens, regardless of what you think, Athena is ever present. And the devil there would be Pan, because he's sort of got these hidden grotto temples. And in fact, the Athenians actually invoked him in a historic battle where they were being invaded, and they chanted Pan, 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 and they won. So he was sort of the little devil there. I think in the context you're talking about, you're and please feel free to correct or whatever. But I think the context you're looking at is, this trickster adversarial spirit that can be called upon in any given location. Well, of course he wouldn't have been called the devil, right? The church gave him that name. And the church gave him that name in many locations. So I think that, we could say devils. We could say that lots of old gods are devils. I know you are quite fond of working with Buka. And Buka is traditionally a fairy.
Right.
That some people
would
would
say
associate.
He could be compared to Robin Goodfellow?
Yes, Robin Goodfellow, Puka,
Tricksters.
the Puka of Ireland. And in fact, the oldest recorded festival in Ireland that could possibly be linked to paganism, and I hate that word, you know that, but for senses, we're good, is the Puck Fair in Kilkenny. And
I didn't know such a thing.
Yes, and they actually still get a goat off the mountain every year, and they crown it like a king. It's still done. It's the oldest festival that still goes on there. Buka was usually, I think, associated with a horse. I don't think it was associated with.
Well, it's weird. If you look at Buka on Wikipedia, it's like an eel. I don't know. It's like a weird sea fish.
A selkie, yeah. Because a lot of times it's like the Capricorn. Horses and for some reason horses and fishes were. And
like Poseidon, god of the sea, and horses.
Yes, I don't know why that is, but yes. Now, I'm not knocking it at all, but the reality of the situation is you're worshipping, from what I see, and please feel free to correct me, because I don't actually, I'm very astute on the Cochrane movement. I know everything about it. I've read the letters. I've formulated my
I don't really.
Yes.
I've read the letters as well.
Some of the more modern stuff, like Jim Agary or these people, I've researched it for my own research purposes. I love Ginsberg. I think he's fantastic.
Yep.
But I definitely feel like what you're doing is like Levi loves the devil and the Queen of Fairies on some level. He
loves the devil.
He does.
Hi, Mom.
He does. He wants
She
us to be
knows.
devil
It's
first.
fine.
We are. It's a time. It's an inspiration, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And you are, drawing upon your own sources or your own iconography. But at the end of the day, when I've heard you talking about things, you are working with a horned god and a moon entity. And it's not really very dissimilar. It's the approach. So maybe you're not like wanting to worship at the foot of Selena and Pan, or maybe you're not wanting to worship at the foot of Osiris and Isis, or maybe you're, whatever god or god, Cernunnos and whoever, Cernunnos and Aphona, whoever we're going to pick, you're maybe taking an approach where you don't want to be a priest right now, and you're working with these entities as more as companions and power of place, and
I'm still finding
it becomes
myself.
extremely problematic when you don't live in those places. But, you can.
Makes it hard, yeah.
American gods. Great.
Yeah.
I think it's that, I don't know. I think in the end of the day, there's a tree of witchcraft that has many, many different branches and roots, and people flow to whatever they flow to, and that's fine. But if you really have the juice, they're connected. And what little I've seen of what you approach things to is that I actually think that you're on a very sincere path of witchcraft. It's just through your own expression and your own art and your own interpretation and your own communication with the powers on your inner planes. I think that Levi and I, even both being initiates, we're both working with our inner planes, but sometimes he wants to be in the forest with dirty lard people.
Lard people, first of all.
Tend to prefer the perfume temples with
I love that too.
magnificently wealthy people.
Isn't that the whole thing about the devil, though? Brian.
Yeah, well-
Like, the whole image of the devil is that you think it's the goat and it's dirty, but then the Sabbath is it's where all of the fabulous,
Who was
like,
it that
wonderful
said you
things
saw
happen.
Right,
the face of
exactly.
Dion Fortune, right? You kiss the ass of the devil and therein find the face
Exactly.
of Isis, you know.
Fantastic.
I
To
love
be
it.
honest, it's like
So,
one of my
um,
favorite
Dion
images.
Fortune.
Yeah,
of
you know that
that.
quote, Dion Fortune, right? It's a great one from the Winged Bull.
The
But,
winged bull,
you
she
guys hear
says,
me?
you go to kiss the ass of the devil and you see the face of
Yeah,
Isis.
love it.
That explains initiatory witchcraft like nothing else does.
Love it.
From my...
But Brian, was your question about like the devil?
Sorry, I dominated that.
Oh, you're fine. Your question was about like, is the devil a more ancient sort of pre-Christian thing?
Are we talking
right?
about the devil as an archetype or as an entity? Is he a who or an it?
Yeah,
You know, both. Just like I described the goddess.
yeah,
You know, as a who, different conversation. You were asking, what is the it? Well, the it, in the lens of Christianity, is the rebel.
yeah.
The rebel spirit.
Rebellious.
The rebellious spirit. That's my interpretation. But the who...
I think he froze, by the
think
way.
it's something
I think you
older.
can still hear us, but
I think he froze. Don't know.
yeah. A little technical
Oh,
difficulty.
we lost him.
Yeah, but we can still communicate and stuff, so it's cool. But no, I do think the devil predates all of that, though, right?
Well, the
full
word
Lord.
does.
Yeah, it's still
Doesn't
God.
it mean little God? Yeah, I was
It's
just gonna
related
say.
to it. Yeah, related to
It's
it.
a little God.
So yeah, God in the woods.
Kind of like a, how would we say that now? The son of a god or a goddess. What is it? A demigod.
demigod. Yeah, a
The same-
demigod.
Sort of interpreted as a demigod.
Oh, welcome back, Brian. Maybe still frozen, Brian.
Might be internet connection. Might be
Yeah.
his internet connection.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. It's like I said, any kind of technical difficulty. But I think he can still communicate. Maybe.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's a very interesting frozen frame we've got here, though.
Brian is very big on Instagram, I guess, you know, and he, you know, is a solitary witch.
Yeah.
And practices from his own vein. I don't know who his main inspiration is. What I do like is he's not delusional. You know, he does understand that what he
I love how
does.
this is as nice as he gets, by the way. Hi, at least you're not delusional. Like, that's
He-
all you get.
Understands that his form of witchcraft has a connection to our.
Jesus, that's so much. Well,
I think we lost him.
I do think we did. That's okay, though. So, if Brian comes back, we can fix it. We are at the 8:37 mark.
Maybe he lost his connection.
Yeah, to the divine. I'm kidding.
Well, what is this?
That's the link that people can use. So,
Would we be able to bring him back on if he calls back?
we can usually invite, but right now it's still showing him as not available.
All right, so maybe he lost his internet
Yeah,
or whatever.
and Brian, if you want to like message us
Let's
or
look at this real quick before we
communicate
close
anything,
off.
and so yeah, we're good.
All right, so once again, I don't think we really scratched the surface. Did we answer Brian's question completely?
I think we hit on the main things, but
Power of place.
power of place, the
So
devil's.
Brian, sorry, I don't know what happened with the connection. It was our first call in. Maybe it was that, but I don't know what you were looking for. Sorry, we didn't get your commentary. I think that it's a matter of. I'm sure there was locality involved in any of these labels. I think Pan was different in Arcadia than he was in Athens.
Sure.
I think, you know, Pan was different in other places. Isis, for instance, you know, you had and I love to go to her because she's always the best example.
I can't see it, but we're looking at a giant statue of her right
Ancient
now.
Egypt or Alexandria, or how was she worshipped in Delphi? How was she worshipped in Athens? And then how was she worshipped by the Roman emperors? And then how was she worshipped by the Britons? Like, it was
moderns,
probably all a bit different in the sense that they were approaching her through their own cultural contexts. I don't think the devil in that time period was as universal, because problem is we're talking about English here, and a lot of times when we're talking about witchcraft and witch trials and all these things, we are talking in English. I don't think the devil was the word used in Italian witch records. That was English witch records, right? So really,
it goes back and forth. Yeah.
so the universalism of that word is really pinched down once you take out the idea. because of the colonization of the English language, I think we do naturally assume anything we're talking about was this broader conversation.
Yeah.
They weren't probably using the same words in Germany or France or whatever. Similar perhaps. Oh, got him back.
Fabulous. Hey, Brian.
All right, let's give him the stage.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Did we answer your question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
we can.
we've got you now.
I just wanted to touch on a few points real quick. I was I guess you guys didn't hear me last time because my internet started going weird.
That was it.
Okay. How you were talking about Pan. What I think is really interesting is that Bucca is an Anglo-Saxon word for he-goat. So when you look back at the time that Bucca was referred to as the devil, it just, I don't know, it all came full circle when I found out about that being an Anglo-Saxon term.
Because it's the goat. Yeah.
Because you could think of Pan as a
always-
Bucca. In that context, you can almost say, well, Pan is a Bucca because he is a he-goat.
I've got to ask Levi a question because he's the linguist. I always called it Buca, which is I could be wrong. I always thought it was Cornish or Welsh or Buca.
It is Cornish.
It's
Yep.
Cornish.
Yeah,
It's
so
Cornish.
that wouldn't be Anglo-Saxon, would it?
No, Cornish is Celtic.
Yeah, I don't think it's an Anglo-Saxon
okay.
word.
Okay, my bad.
Sorry, that's the reason.
Yeah,
The reason why I connected that is because the Irish puka, I think they're the same thing. That's all. And I think puck and puka
They're all
and
related.
puka, I
Right,
think
right.
they're all
Yeah,
related.
exactly.
I think
And see,
so.
that's why I always
Now,
think
what's
of
interesting is, like I told you, even though I don't think there's any evidence of historical evidence of
Right.
buka or puka being goats, there's a puck fair to this day going on in Ireland, and that is a goat. So just because we don't have the historical evidence doesn't mean it wasn't.
Yeah.
And it does sound kind of Puck and Pan and Robin Goodfellow. I mean, there's a lot of
devil
goat
being
stuff going on there. So,
Pan, the
sorry,
devil.
didn't mean to interfere with your question, but yeah, it's not
No,
Anglo-Saxon.
you're fine.
Yeah.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I know that was kind of like a question for both of you. I know you said, a question for me and a question for Levi. Yeah, I mean, that you guys pretty much answered it I mean, I guess yeah, I mean,
Calling him the he-goat, I get is...
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, for the devil. But the thing is
we love goats.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's
Of
a sacred
course.
symbol, right?
I actually tried goat meat. Have you ever had goat meat?
I have.
I
don't eat
would
anymore,
not
but
eat
I
a
used to.
goat. You
Well, I
hillbilly.
celebrated
I wasn't an
Lupercalia for the
initiate
first
when I
time
ate the devil's
this
flesh.
year.
No, I'm a fan, but I'm kind of with Brian.
I've had
Now
goat
it would feel
cheese.
weird.
I'd eat goat cheese. That's
It'd be like eating the Dark Lord. I'm like,
I
I
can't
can't.
eat goat.
can't.
Have you
My
guys
fellow-
ever celebrated Lupercalia? Are you familiar with that festival?
I know we don't celebrate it. It's in the Covendom.
Well,
but,
we don't celebrate it under that name.
yeah, no.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
but,
guess traditionally they would eat goats.
Yeah.
They
So
did,
that's
yeah.
why I
Part
tried
of
it.
the
It was
food.
Which
there. I
god
was
is
like,
called
you
the
know what?
goat eater? Is it? There's a god who's they're in Greek. Maybe somebody knows, but their epithet is the eater of goats, right? Something phagos. I can't remember what it is, but yeah, there's a goat eater as an ancient god, which I love. But no, the goat. Yeah, I love the goat as the devil image, right? Big fan, and I do think it's connected to a lot of the mythology.
Here's the
goats.
basic thing. I believe, Brian. I believe that the devil you're connecting with, the energies that you're connecting with, I don't think they have anything to do with Christianity.
Right,
Yeah.
of course.
They're much
Yeah.
older. Yeah.
So, that's,
Isn't folk devil a term? Is that kind of like the
I think
the
that's a very
easiest
good term. Yes.
to use for
Yes,
this
I think so.
particular?
I mean, we're inventing them now, aren't we? But
Of
yes,
course.
I think folk devil. Yes, because as I spoke earlier, I think that's a great term.
Yeah.
In that sense, we look at the folk devil as being our god.
Sure.
We don't worship Satan, though. We're not Christianity and Judaism and the Abrahamic faiths are not necessarily under our lens in the West. So pre-Christian anyway. But we're not trying. The thing is with us is we're not trying to be villains or be rebels in itself. However, in a modern context, we are rebels.
Right, of course.
Whether we're saying magic is real or
And wouldn't you say witches historically were rebellious?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. It's witches exist in liminal space.
There's
right?
multitudes of examples of us being rebellious. I am more of the mind frame now, however, that I want to focus more on, not needing to be rebellious. I want to be a conqueror.
Yeah, like no more rebellion, time to own a kingdom, right? Yeah.
I want to be a conqueror. I want to raise armies. I want to build marble temples to Astarte. I want oiled priests and priestesses, beautifully perfumed.
It's taking it to a weird place.
To dance and sing songs and hymns. I'm not about getting mosquito bites in the woods.
But you can rebel against a lot of
Because
things.
if you have
I want to rebel against
hemlock
boring
and lard on you.
I want to rebel against boredom and ugliness and modernism and hideous postmodern late stage capitalist nothingness. Like,
so everything before you met me.
Great. Like, you know what? I'm just tired of life being beiger than that goddamn Donna Lewis video in the 90s. You remember that video for, like, I love you always forever. Beigest goddamn thing you ever seen.
These things must be done delicately.
So, Brian, that's my rebellion, right? I like the devil because he's a rebellion against boredom. He's a rebellion against... But not... I agree with Brian. It doesn't have to be a rebellion against the church.
Here's what I would say to initiates. I do believe that... and non-initiates. I believe that we shouldn't be afraid of that mythological story that is a part of witchcraft history. It is a part of our history.
It is. You can't deny it either.
No, you can't get no devil, no witchcraft.
It comes through a lens of a lot of... It is mythology because we're going off, things people said where they were being tortured and all, there's a lot of reasons to doubt it, but there's a consistency to some of it as well that makes it, interesting, to say the least. I think it's something to pay attention to, and it's all we have. I believe that there were revivals of pagan cults within Christianity. I do. So maybe some of them called their god the devil, or maybe somebody else called their god the devil. I don't know.
And it would have been the time they were in.
But as a representation today, yes, I think there is a folklore devil, there is a witchcraft devil that is completely separate from the Christian idea of Satan and the devil.
Agreed.
However,
Steve,
Charles Leland,
the devil is the he represents that force of nature, that primal. He's the perfect representation of man and beast.
like Pan.
Yeah.
Exactly. For instance, I have
Or
a sculpture
Carnanus.
I have a sculpture of Pan. I refer to him as Bucka, but I'm going in through that context of the whole he-goat.
Yeah,
he-goat.
But I also think this is a devil in a sense because I don't.
Yes.
What I'm saying is, I don't
God
think,
to me.
Yep.
I don't think that Pan is the only one that likes the drinking
Of
and
course
the
not.
feasting and the
Not
dancing.
Dionysus.
Yeah.
Like, I know he's playing
Serapis.
fights, but to me that's just his symbolism for
Carnanus.
music. He loves music.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Well, I love the fife that he has because the thing... Actually, I was just studying because as many of you know, I'm writing a book right now. Well on its way.
Yes.
Pan in Alexandria, Egypt, which big surprise. I'm obsessed with Alexandria, Egypt.
Shock.
Pan
I didn't know Pan stretched over to Egypt.
Yes, he did.
Wow.
Well, because you have to remember, Alexandria, Egypt was a Greek city.
Greek city.
Okay.
Founded by Alexander the Great, and would later be occupied by, the Ptolemies, who were
Cleopatra.
the first Ptolemy was one of Alexander the Great's generals, going all the way down, descending to Cleopatra. They were all the legacy of Alexander the Great, and that was the last pharaoh of Egypt officially. But then the Roman emperors would become pseudo pharaohs of Egypt, god kings. However, in that city, a lot of religious things happened. It was a very multifaceted city, a very cultural city with a huge impact on the world spiritually that is underestimated. It took over, it surpassed Athens, because when Rome rose, Athens was no longer a thing, right?
It was like a college town.
But
at that
Alexandria had become the Greek center culture for the Greeks. Alexandria, because Ptolemy actually created a huge empire. And so the Greek civilization, we had the Library of Alexandria, and we had the Lighthouse of Alexandria, all these things. Actually, it was the cult center not only to Isis and Serapis, but Dionysus's cult once centered there. And yes, Pan there was actually viewed as being sort of cosmic. I'm saying that in a 70s way.
But bigger than the...
They took him and put him into a philosophical context that he was probably never in previously. because they compared him to Ptah and things like that.
But he was still that devilish creature.
And I actually read, I don't know the source for it, that one of the biggest Roman temples to Pan was found in Egypt. So, and Pan didn't typically have temples. He was in grottos, groves, or whatever. So, well, the horned god was always really big in Egypt. So it's not really a big surprise. So, I think everything you're saying is very true. And all I would say to counter that at all is that these are. May I ask you a question, Brian?
Of course, I'm ready.
So you worship or you work with, the horned deity, and you work with, don't let me word it for you. I've heard you say you work with some version of the horned god and some version of a moon entity. So paraphrase that for me.
Within the last decade, when I first started my path, it was very feminine in practice. I was very much tied in. I didn't have a balance of the feminine and the masculine. I just felt very pulled to the goddess, and I still am. But in the last 3 years, there's been a shift that has happened, and I can't really put my finger on it, quite honestly, of what was caused by that shift or what the shift was caused by. But I just immediately, well, I can say this, I've always worked with Pan. I've always had an attraction to him, but I think I could say, and I don't want to speak for a lot of gay witches, but I find it very common that gay male witches do, they're very familiar with Pan. There was like a veil lifted. I think I've always, or at least the entity who I call devil or Bucka or what have you, I feel I veiled him to be comfortable with him because I felt growing up, there is no devil in witchcraft. The devil is evil. He's hiding behind every corner to undermine, the good things in life. So there was that fear. But I also think fear can play a good part in magic. But also, I think I veiled this entity who I was working with as Pan to be more comfortable with him. And maybe it was Pan, but maybe it was the devil, and they're both maybe, because I also have the belief that all is one. But I also think the devil wears many masks too, and many guises. Pan, to me, at least from my experience, Pan being one of those masks. But after I lifted that veil, and I've, of course, doing research and learning more about him and stretching my research out into other areas like Cornwall, researching the devil of the English witches and the devil of the Scottish witch, and all that, a veil was lifted and I became way more comfortable. And now I'm just full on masculine, like, you know what I mean? Like my practice has taken a shift more to the masculine side. I have not put the goddess of the moon to the back. I still honor her in my own way, but it's just, I'm still trying to find that balance. I don't know how to bring that balance back into,
Well, here's the thing here, the advice I would
I
give
feel like
to
I'm
you.
kind of going with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I don't want to stress too much about it, but I also want to find a way to kind of get in.
Well, I think that as practitioners on our own, we've got to cut this off because we've only got 8 minutes left, I think.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. You're our first video call, and it's grand. I think that to speak to my own personal practice, sometimes I vacillate fully to the goddess, and sometimes I vacillate fully to the god. It's natural human instinct to go with what you need at the time or what you're doing. And I have done that in my own practice. I have gone full on goddess, I've gone full on god, and I do it all the time. In our rituals, I'm brought into that balance because the rituals are geared towards that balance continuously. So I would just say, I guess my advice to you would be that I do believe that even in the mythology of the witchcraft devil, there was always usually the maiden, the queen of Elfame, the witch that he needed, whatever it was. Whether it was the female witch or whether it was the maiden or the queen of Elfame or Diana or whatever it's going to be. There is that other side of the coin. I think that, as you're saying, if we're looking at the devil as an archetype of, nature rebelling against an oppressive regime that's clearly not interested in the natural order of things, which is true because we're talking about the church, which was sexually repressive and yada, yada, yada. And the devil was, in witchcraft mythology, liberating the female sexuality. He was fucking them. He was dancing naked with them. He was whipping them. He was giving them power. So there was this whole idea there that, that there was this sort of two-way street going on. So even in that mythology, I don't think the devil was masculine of itself. I think he was an instrument of freedom for feminine power. And that's overreading into it, I suppose, on some level. But if you really, really want to dig into it, the church loathed female sexuality.
I do. So the devil is, even being a masculine figure, is
he
still
was
bringing
tempting the women into being sexual.
Yeah.
He was tempting the women into having power. I think we lost him.
We did, but he can still, of course, hear us and everything. But
good questions, Brian.
Yes,
thank you for being our first call-in. And we're going to close off tonight with these words. I do think that nature teaches us everything we need to know. Pay attention to it, understand it, respect it. It is not our enemy. Being gay is a part of nature. You find it in animals. Sexuality is a part of nature. You find it in animals. Procreation is nature's design for how we procreate. The most successful way for us to survive. But it's also to teach us that we need something else outside of ourselves to make that big thing happen, And so I think that, when we say we're a nature religion, we're not saying anything other than we are ever present in reality, and we believe in as above, so below. Add to it. Close it off.
To close, I would say, we've talked a lot about gods, and what I like that we didn't is we didn't go through and say, like, I like Diana because of this or whatever. We talked about the bigger concept here, which is witchcraft can be religious. Other people don't own it. We get to worship the gods. We get to be servants of the gods. We get to be priests, and I am very grateful that we do. So, if you're feeling that draw to something higher, it's fine. You can explore that, and you can raise power through it. There's a lot of power in it, and the god and goddess of witchcraft have always existed in every mystery cult, in many different traditions. They are what they are.
Make a pact. Write your name in the book.
Write your name. And with that, we're gonna go watch.
Keep hitting the wrong one.
I'm gonna go binge watch some Sabrina later.
I don't know which one it is. Gonna do Black Phillip.
Right, my book. It's this one.
I'll do the Coven one.
Yeah. I'm going to go home and binge watch my own Book of the Beast. So, cheers to everyone. Thanks for watching. And
good
we'll
night,
see you next
everyone.
time.
There were covens in Europe. That's what they're called. The congregation. Covens in Europe, in America, and in Australia, and they have one right here. That whole bunch. The parties with the singing and the flute and the
I
chanting.
thought we would
Those
ask
are
our favorite
Espas or
Covendom.
Sabbaths.
I know. We didn't
Read
even.
what they do, Guy. They use blood.